What is up, folks? It's your host with the most, Amber Turd, and I'm visited today, as always, joined by my co-host, the right-hand man, the Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ himself. Can I get an amen, brother?
You're
Anyway, a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world. As usual, every week it seems to get fucking crazier and crazier. Anyway, a lot of weird shit going on, a lot of stuff to talk about. I know there's been some updates with everything that's been transpiring with Twitter. I know you have more on this, but I will let you take it away because I know a little bit about it, but I don't know as much as you. You're omnipotent, all powerful, all knowing, almighty. So you know everything, and I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, there's been a lot going on with Twitter. There's a huge update of what's happened with Twitter recently. So on Elon tweeted basically on Twitter, he basically making fun of the board and basically probing them. He tweeted that if his tender offer for Twitter is accepted, he will be firing every single one of the board members. And he will save an equivalent of $3 million for Twitter. And many people are speculating like how is he going to finance this purchase because Twitter is worth like 46 and a half or 47 billion dollars, and he's cash poor. He only has money in like SpaceX, Boring Company, Neuralink, and Tesla stock. So people are trying to speculate about how he's going to finance this purchase. And Apollo came forward. They said that they would finance the purchase for him. Morgan Stanley said that they would finance the purchase for him. And I don't think he really wants to like buy 100% of Twitter. I think he's going to get a couple of his friends together, and they're going to basically buy Twitter together, because I think that's the move. Since they poison pilled him and he's only allowed to own 15%, he's going to have to recruit a lot of different people to basically get this purchase through. And he actually submitted a tender offer, which basically means that he's offering to buy Twitter stock like from each shareholder. So if you bought uh, Twitter stock on open market right now, you could sell it directly to Elon for 54.20, and he's doing that for each and every Twitter member. It's to basically circumvent the board.
So how does that, like, how much of a premium does that represent over the market value right now? Do we know what that is? What is it, like a 20% premium or probably close to that?
Well, Twitter probably trading around 49 right now. And there's many different companies that actually did this. MicroStrategy actually did this, and people were just like buying MicroStrategy stock, and they were just like selling it directly to Michael Saylor. Like there's a lot of people that do this. Like it's basically like an arbitrage. You could buy Twitter and just sell it directly to Elon for 54.20, and he's willing to buy anybody's shares at 54.20, basically at the market premium. Because basically the poison pill, I don't think it applies to like direct sales or something like that. It's like some kind of workaround, since it's like a tender offer or something like that. I think it goes around the shareholders' rights plan. I don't know exactly how that works though.
Well, that's really interesting because I'm looking at the market now, and it looks like it's about a 10% premium. So obviously that gap is closed substantially from the last time we took a look at that.
Right. Yeah. It's Twitter's at, I think Twitter's at like 49, right? So yeah, that's about 10%, 49 to 54.
Yeah, it was 49 and change as of market close today.
Yeah, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, they're not going to be too happy about this action, what's going on. They're tweeting left and right, with their little capes on, their little fucking sombrero, whatever the fuck they wear over there, a little white suit in the little 110-degree weather. They're typing on that keyboard like keyboard warriors, saying, "We do not want free speech. We do not want free speech. We must stop Elon." And they're going nuts over there, basically. And they think they have power because they're Saudi Arabia. They only own 5%. We'll just fucking override him. Like, this is not the Middle East. You have no power over here in America. We do what we want, and we don't listen to you bozos in the Middle East over here.
So that's interesting because I did see Elon replied to the tweet that the Saudis put out saying, I'll give more context here. So the Saudis put out this tweet basically saying that they hereby reject Elon Musk, like his offer that he made to buy Twitter outright, and they cited what Twitter's potential like future growth and various list of different things. but it looks like Elon ended up replying to that tweet, and he said directly something to the extent of, how many shares do you guys own in Twitter via the kingdom? You know, yourself, the gentleman who is obviously related to the Saudi royal crown who put out this tweet. And then his second question, which was kind of a troll question, was like, how does the kingdom feel about free speech? Which I think we all know kind of how they feel about free speech with some of the events that transpired with a particular journalist within the last 2 years. So, I think we know how they stand with that. But as far as the first question, and this is really my question to you, how much does the Saudi crown actually own? You said 5%, but does the PIF, the private investment fund, do they own quite a bit? And for people who don't know about that, maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on that, because that is important and it does play like a big geopolitical role, particularly in the investment space.
No, I think the kingdom owns a total of about 5%. So, I don't think they have much control when it comes to stuff like this. You got Elon that has more stock. You got BlackRock, Vanguard, etc., who have more say in what actually happens in this regard. And back then, this was like the wild, wild west. Like Silicon Valley would be raising money from Saudi Arabia left and right, and now they actually moved away from that. And I think there's a certain law that was actually implemented where they put I think Saudi Arabia is on this like ban list or whatever like that, and you have to get it approved for certain investments. So Saudi Arabia can't just invest in any company in Silicon Valley that they want now. They put people on these like kind of lists.
That's interesting. I just remember the crown being like big, big, big investors into Uber. It looks like also into the company that makes well, it's the company that owns Rockstar Games, which makes GTA. I know they own quite a big stake in that. And then they own, I think, a giant piece of EA as well, Electronic Arts. So the crowd has been moving into other, various different things. But the interesting thing to me is that the Saudi royal crown cites Twitter's growth potentials. And to be completely honest with you, I don't see the argument at all. If you actually look at Twitter's metrics, you could see that they do have a declining user base. Um, as Elon pointed out, the top 10 Twitter accounts very seldomly tweeted this year, if at all. He obviously fell within the top 10 in terms of followers and in terms of activity. He was like very active. But that general top 10 in terms of follower count, like none of these people tweeted. And they were all like big recording artists, stuff like that. Very public, well-known figures, but Twitter has a declining user base problem. It seems that, at least in my opinion, they changed their metric from daily active users to monthly active users to now some weird conglomeration of the two, monetizable daily active users. And truth be told, anytime you see a company, particularly in that social media space, change how they measure activity and how relevant, because let's be real, the number of people using the platform each and every day is the most important metric, especially if you're a social media platform where most of your revenue is going to come from advertising, right? Like looking at Facebook and the whole situation that's transpired with them and that whole downward spiral is that all of these different privacy measures were built into the hardware that stopped sort of the software aspect of Facebook being able to run targeted ads, or allowing, the hardware aspect of Apple basically saying, well, fuck Facebook. We're going to stop, our users from getting targeted ads and, obviously stopping a lot of different privacy violations at the same time. So on that same, level, any sort of company that like consistently changes their metrics in that social media space, it's like the same as an investment company constantly changing auditors, and you're almost just kind of like shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic, as I like to call it. And I just think it's pretty interesting that that's going on.
I don't know what exactly you mean by that, shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic. How so?
Because they have a declining user base, like they're obviously not as relevant as they once were, and now there's like other platforms like on the come up. Obviously, YouTube's kind of here to stay. Like YouTube's not going to go anywhere. I mean, Facebook is pretty stagnant too in terms of user growth. Instagram is probably the most relevant, and then TikTok now has 1 billion users as well. So like, there's a few different other platforms on the come up that seem to have more of a greater likelihood of future potential growth and like monetizable users, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that actually makes sense. And Netflix, if you look at them, they're actually looking at basically having like an ad supported plan, because basically all these people, um they think people are like sharing accounts, and they're basically blaming customers for their downfalls, which is basically a huge mistake. You never want to blame your customer for your own shortcomings and stuff like that. That's like Blockbuster, and why Blockbuster went out of business, because they were blaming customers for basically wanting to watch content online, and basically blaming customers for stealing DVDs and not returning them in time, and basically blaming customers for not paying late fees. Like, you never want to blame your customers for your own shortcomings. But yeah, this ad supported plan basically, which would lower the price of basically a subscription. I don't think it's actually a good idea. I don't think people um, want to watch ads on Netflix. I think Netflix's one benefit is basically not having ads. Like, that's why people watch Netflix instead of TV. People don't want to watch ads. People don't want to interrupt their program for ads. People's time's valuable, and they don't want to sit through TV. The little time that they have to watch an ad while they're watching a TV show.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you bring that up because Hulu currently does that, and no one really pays for like fucking Hulu with ads. Everyone just gets the ad-free version because it's just much better. But just to offer some more context into this whole situation, if you've been paying attention to the markets, I mean, really, unless you lived under a rock, over this past week, Netflix is down 36%, just based off of an atrocious earnings report that came out. Netflix posted their first subscriber loss in a decade. You even have an activist investor in Bill Ackman who sold off his entire position. The state of Canada, listen to me, I'm fucking going crazy here. The state of California even posted a $685 million loss to their portfolio. So they're taking some brunt of the hit here too. And like you just previously said, Reed Hastings, the founder and CEO of Netflix, he even went out and said that there's 100 million subscribers who are sharing accounts, and now Netflix is trying to go after that. Now, if you ask me, that's just penny pinching on Netflix's part. Obviously, sharing accounts is a big problem for most of these platforms, but really, my biggest point here, my biggest gripe with Netflix is that, truth be told, Netflix is completely overrated. There are way too competitors in such a formerly small space. Netflix has spent way too much money towards licensing rights, and now production companies who Netflix acquired these licensing rights from, I mean, they really attacked this a smart way. They played the long game. They let Netflix take the risk, and then once the model was proven, they jumped into that space, right? We saw Paramount do it. We saw AMC do it. Comcast, which is NBC, do that with Peacock. And then we saw Disney do the same thing as well. And then another gripe that I have with Netflix is that all the originals that they're putting out, they're not living up to the hype. All the super OG original shows on Netflix were fucking awesome, like Stranger Things, and some of these other shows were really good. But really, another point is that the library is constantly in a state of flux. I can't tell you how many times I've seen shows and movies removed, and all of a sudden they magically get added back like 5 months later. Like, how the fuck does that work? You're paying for the licensing rights for movies and shows. What are you getting it for like a week or two at a time? And then you're like, we'll add it back 5 months from now. Like, how the fuck does that work? I don't even understand it. It's ridiculous. So Netflix has no leverage. They're spending way too much on these shitty original shows and movies and docuseries, and they're paying all this money to all these people, and it's just like, who the fuck is gonna watch your shitty show that isn't any good and no one has any interest in? You also have things that have sentimental value to people. So I'll give you a great example. Like Indiana Jones was on Netflix for a while, right? And then Universal, they got smart. Well, really, LucasArts was sold to Disney, but at the time when Universal did own LucasArts, they were just like, oh, Indiana Jones is on there. Okay. They like said, fuck it. Let Netflix run with that. Let them have a field day. And then once Netflix showed that that model is sustainable, all these other businesses are like, fuck it, let's get in there. And they were so smart about it. They were quietly building up the infrastructure. Let Netflix test the water. If Netflix went out of business, do you think Disney would have cared? No, because guess what? They're not losing anything. they're licensing all their movies out to Netflix, and they're signing a contract with them to basically collect royalties for the next 5 years or 3 years. And then now all these contracts are expiring. These companies are being smart. They're building up their own platform, and they're just saying, you know what? Fuck Netflix. We have our own IP. IP is everything in that space, especially in entertainment. IP is everything. For those of you who don't know and who aren't familiar, IP is just intellectual property. You need to create your own shit. But the problem is Netflix is just way overspending. They're doing way too much, and they have a lot of debt, right? I mean, I think you know a little bit more about this than me, but I'm pretty sure they have just an insurmountable amount of debt, and at some point, they've got to pay it.
They're basically spending too much money on content creation each and every month. They're basically breaking even. They're gonna have to forever spend money on content creation because once people watch a show, they don't want to rewatch the show. It's basically a content game, and they're not doing anything with the intellectual property. They should be building theme parks, selling merchandise, etc., with the intellectual property. But going back to these like platforms and everything like that, how Disney, Paramount, and all these other companies are building different platforms, and Hulu, etc. The one benefit of these services was that it was cheaper than regular TV. And now, since you're getting this kind of like defranchised, decentralized kind of service with all these different things, it might even become more expensive than TV because you're gonna have to subscribe to all these different like subscriptions, and it basically gets rid of the benefit of buying Netflix. People bought Netflix, people bought Hulu, etc., because it was cheaper than TV, and they could basically get the same amount of entertainment for a cheaper price. Now, since everyone's taking their intellectual property back and putting it on different services, I think it loses a little bit of its benefit. I think they're actually giving TV a chance to get back into the game that they wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah, that's a really awesome point. Just all these companies just saying, "Fuck it, let's start our own streaming service. Let's get our own IP back." There definitely is some shenanigans going on there. But a lot of these companies now, what I'm seeing is like Disney, for instance, owns a stake in Hulu. They don't own Hulu outright, and then obviously they have Disney Plus in that umbrella, and they have ESPN. So now what I'm seeing is like Disney has their own bundle, and you're seeing that the Disney bundle is Disney Plus, ad-free Hulu, and then ESPN Plus, which ESPN Plus is pretty good. You could also watch live sports through Hulu, and I think also ESPN Plus. So like that's a huge thing. Like that's monumental. So you're seeing like a lot of these companies kind of collaborate, even in different spaces. Like you see, particularly Spotify has a deal with Hulu if you're a student subscriber where like you get discounted Hulu with it or something like that. So it's going to be interesting to see moving forward how these companies kind of like really what they do and if they decide to work together because like you said, it's getting to the point where regular cable is going to be basically the same price. But I think the one edge they have on regular cable is that it's ad free. So even if you spend the same amount of money like for all these streaming services as you would as cable, at least you're not really going to see any ads, right? I mean, isn't that kind of worth it because you're valuing your time more?
Well, I mean, Netflix was exploring a ad support program. I think once their growth stalls, once these platforms growth stalls, I think they're just gonna basically switch over to ads. I think there's no ads right now because they're in the growth stage of getting customers, and it's kind of like a value proposition that they have no ads. But the minute their growth stalls and their stock goes down a little bit, they're going to be running to basically supporting ads.
Well, that's what we saw this past quarter. Netflix, like I said, the first time in 10 years that they posted subscriber losses. So it really the growth is running out here. They're out of steam. They're losing subscribers. Like that's insane. And people thought this gravy train was never going to end with Netflix. It's just absolutely incredible. They seem to think that Netflix is just going to grow forever, and unfortunately, that's not how it works.
Well, you want to know the one problem with Netflix? Basically, the one problem with Netflix is, you know what they say, uh, whatever goes woke goes broke, and that's starting to be the same thing with Disney. In Florida, Disney's actually pushing um, movies, and they want to basically have these kind of movies where they push transgender characters on the youth, and this is going to have a big impact on our youth, and I don't think people should take this lightly. I just like radio shows and everything are regulated, and they have like M for mature, whatever they have. Like when you look at theater, I think TV shows should also be regulated because they have a big impact on society and what they can control. Like Disney shouldn't just be able to do whatever they want with their characters. And I know that sounds counterintuitive to free speech and what many people believe in, but Hollywood can have a big impact on society. Like if you look back, even in the 50s, 60s, 70s, like common words that we use today were actually created by TV shows. Like the sound of a frog, the ribbit sound, whatever, that was actually made by a TV show. Nobody was saying that before the 60s. Catfish, that was created by that MTV show. Uh, bucket list, friend zone, all these words that we use today are all created by Hollywood. So Hollywood can have a big impact on society. And I think, as a society, we have a right to basically regulate and shape what these companies are doing. And, we can't just give them free reign to do whatever the hell they want. And, many people might think that's counterintuitive to free speech, but I'm not saying silence them or prohibit them from doing whatever they want to do. But, it should be regulated. There should be a warning label on it or something like that. I know you Twitter people like that warning label. Little liberals over there in, California. You love those little warning labels. I think you should put that on this. What goes for the left goes for the right. And, basically, here's another argument that you could actually say about, Hollywood. There's actually studies done that basically Hollywood, with their movies and etc., they actually perpetuated racism and Nazism, and that it lasted. I think those studies said that it lasted uh, like a decade or so longer than it would have had if basically they didn't have these movies and they didn't come out.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that particularly during World War II, Walt Disney was awarded a medal from Hitler, which is like, whoa, like that's some fucking crazy shit. He was awarded a medal, and I believe that Henry Ford was as well, which is very odd. But as far as everything else you said about like potentially regulating it and just the content creation process and movies and everything else, like when you look at YouTube, YouTube's a great example, right? Like YouTube is so smart, like they totally get it. We love Google, that they're pretty good with stuff like this, but they have like content warning labels and like different disclosures that have to be made prior to uploading our content, right? So if our content is not for kids, we have to disclose it's not for kids. If we use like explicit language, YouTube is going to filter a lot of that out and make sure that, our content isn't pushed towards anyone who doesn't fall within like the appropriate age demographic or like a mature audience, right? And then another aspect is that any sort of sponsorships we have to disclose legally. You are legally required to. Anyone that doesn't do that is violating. I believe it's the FTC law on that and regulation. And I think the same should be done for just conventional media, like any type of movies, shows, anything like that. There should definitely be some type of disclosure or maybe potentially regulation. I mean, I'm not opposed to regulation, but on that same line of thought of regulation, like, how do you feel about news agencies possibly getting the same type of disclosures or warning labels? And obviously, like you said, a lot of people feel otherwise because they think it's a violation of free speech.
Yeah, I think everybody should be getting the warning labels, and then basically the population at large can dissect what's true and what's not true. You shouldn't be basically deleting or getting rid of the content. If you want to put the warning label, I guess that's okay. But if they use the warning label fairly judiciously, they put warning labels on a lot of things that shouldn't have warning labels on them. But I get it. If you want to put the warning label to basically warn people, since they're gullible, you could put the warning label. That's better than taking the content down. Like if you want to fight misinformation, I guess if you think it's untrue as a platform, put the warning label up, I guess, and then people can decide if it's actually false or it's not false if it's true. I think a warning label is better than silencing people. But people say, "Oh, free speech, free speech, free speech." How come you can't say curse words on the radio? How come that's not against free speech? So there's certain speech that can actually be regulated. And TV and radio are platforms at large that affect society. So if you could regulate the radio and what's being said, then you should be able to basically regulate TV.
Yeah, radio is definitely a weird thing with regulation. We saw in the 80s and in the 90s, like Howard Stern was fighting that battle even into the 2000s. He even has like his best moments put out on radio on tape, and it's called Crucified by the FCC, which is pretty funny. But yeah, he was a huge free speech proponent. At that point, like he was just getting the FCC going after him like on a pretty much a regular basis. Like they were going after his like radio stations he worked for, and like this is definitely like a conversation that people have to have, and I think it's really important. Like, do we want to regulate things, and if so, to what extent? Right? Like, where do you draw the line in the sand? And it totally agree with you. And as far as like warning labels and various different things like that, CNN Plus, we were on the topic of streaming services. CNN Plus, like, what type of warning label do you think they would get?
Oh, CNN Plus is actually shutting down. I don't think they're going to get any warning label because they're
they're
shutting
gonna get
down.
they're gonna get the defunct warning label. That was what I was hoping you'd say.
They're going to get the shutdown warning label.
Yeah, so they had this whole thing where they poached Chris Wallace from I believe Fox News, right? And his dad was Mike Wallace, and so he was poached and ended up going to CNN, and like he had his own show on CNN Plus. So it was originally offered at like $6 a month, but like no one was paying for it, so they cut it to $3 a month, and then now literally a month after launching, they just completely shut the service down. So I think the warning label they're gonna get is probably defunct.
The shutdown warning label. That's what I call it. But yeah, what are your thoughts on basically this regulation when it comes to these? I guess it's similar kind of to social media in a sense. TV, you could basically group together TV, radio, and social media.
Well, I think regulating social media is like kind of I mean at this point it's got to happen. My stance with social media is that it's a public utility. It's basically the town square. I mean, realistically, any sort of opinions or presence that you want to have that can materially affect other people, at least in today's day and age, in my opinion, in Western civilization, it's through social media. There is no really like town meeting, right? Like wherever you live, you're not gonna be like, all right, everyone, let's go to the town meeting and have a fucking vote. Like that's not how it works. Like you go to Twitter, you go on Instagram, right? Maybe you go on Facebook to argue with your fucking wacko aunt who watches Stephen Colbert every night and gets drunk, and she's a little whacked out, and you fight with her and you talk about politics or whatever. Obviously, I love ripping on Facebook. Like, if you read the description for all of our podcasts, I shit on Facebook every time. I will never pass on the opportunity to shit on Facebook and how politicized it is. And like, it basically is just old boomers just fighting on there, and it's fucking great entertainment. Facebook, I'm sorry, Zuckerberg, I'm sorry, but like, you have a toxic fucking platform, and I will continuously shit on it at every chance I get. Nonetheless, I digress. So social media should be regulated. I believe so. Definitely should be treated as a public utility. Movies and TV shows are odd to me. I think they should, at the bare minimum, be held to the same standard as our content is with YouTube, where we have disclosures or like certain things are age restricted. And then I think especially, and I think this is the main thing that you're talking about, particularly with Disney, their target demographic is a younger audience. So if we look at the scientific data, it all points to the fact that the prefrontal cortex isn't done fully developing until you're the age of 25. So people, particularly in that school, and I'd say people, right, colloquially, but really children under the age of like 15 or even 13, they're the most susceptible to adult influence and any sort of content that comes out or media. Like they're the most susceptible to kind of following in the footsteps of that. So I think at the bare minimum, they should be held to the same disclosures that we are. And then potentially it's something that needs to be pursued further where you kind of draw the line and you say, okay, like maybe these aren't topics we should talk about for children. Like, you brought up DeSantis, like there was that whole thing where he cut Disney's funding. I know you want to speak a little bit about that, but DeSantis, like his whole stance was like, these are mature topics that are being discussed, and Disney had like this major opposition to this bill that we wanted to pass. And basically when you look at the bill, not to get too political here, but when you look at the bill, I mean, he pretty much is just saying he's okay with the conversation that they're having, but he doesn't want to teach like transgenderism or anything that falls within that spectrum to children who are in the first or second grade, who really they don't know what sexuality is. Like they don't know what it's like to to love someone or whatever, and to be at that level. Like they're not fully grown adults. They're not, their brain's not fully developed. They're not in a position where they've even gone through puberty, so they don't know what those feelings are. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to have that stance. Like, there's this whole thing in Canada where you could actually be prosecuted if you have an 8-year-old child or a 10-year-old child who wants to transition. And if you stop them from transitioning, you can be penalized and you can be thrown in jail. And it's this fucking incredibly stupid thing. You're letting someone whose brain's not fully developed, they don't know who they are as a person yet, like make decisions that are life altering decisions. It's the same as giving a kid a cigarette and or giving a kid booze and just being like, have a field day. You have to. My main thing is this, like, as we said before on this podcast, we believe in the democratization of information. We believe in giving people options, and that's what you have to do. But you have to do that when they're fully capable of making decisions on their own. A child is not capable of, a child doesn't have the same judgment as me or as God or as like a fully functioning, adult contributing to society. So anyway, that's just my rant on that. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. People, you don't see children walking around with cigarettes and everything like that. You don't see children walking around with alcohol. Society has expectations, and they prevent and protect children from this. And many people say like, "Oh, leave it up to the parents. Leave it up to the parents. The parents should be able to uh, decide what they want for their children, etc." But are parents allowed to give children cigarettes? No, they would. That would be considered basically malfeasance or whatever you want to call it. Are parents, allowed to give children drugs? Are parents allowed to give children alcohol? No. Society has expectations for children, and they're not allowed to have these certain substances until they're old enough, until basically their mind is developed enough to reason and decide whether it's a good idea or bad idea to experiment in that regard. And this is not a decision that should necessarily be left up to parents, because we got a lot of deadbeats in our society who think that transgenderism is it's okay. They feel like a male was born in a female's body. I don't really believe in that bullshit. I think that's total nonsense. I think transgenderism is actually a mental illness, and I don't think it does transgenders any good. Basically, telling them that they aren't in fact a female when they're a male. There might be feminine men, or there might be a masculine female, but and you could say gender is a spectrum in that regard, but there's no such thing as a male that's actually a female. A female has reproduct reproductive capabilities, ovaries, etc. X, Y, certain chromosomes. Just because you cut your little sack off, your little dingaling, that doesn't necessarily make you a female in that regard. There's other things that determine gender and sex, and basically we could talk about modern gender studies and what they think. Basically now, for the past basically I don't know, thousands of years probably, gender and sex were basically equivalents in Webster's dictionary or dictionary, etc. And what's was commonly accepted by society. Now they're trying to change the definition of gender and sex, and basically sex is basically what you were born as. That's considered your sex. And now they're trying to say gender is basically fluid, and gender changes with the wind, and there's an indefinite number of genders, and genders on a spectrum, and there's no such thing as two genders.
Yeah, the whole gender thing kind of gets like a weird argument that these people commonly have. But at the same time, as far as like transgenderism, I'm not even really opposed to it. I just feel like you got to pick a team though. Like, are you the pink team or are you the blue team? Like, just pick a team. As far as people who are transitioning and stuff like that, I think it's like I said, a major life altering decision. So you have to weigh all of your options. You definitely should go to therapy for that. Because at the same line of thought, a lot of people who are considering transitioning, there are also people who suffer from any mental illness or body dysmorphia. Like just like you'd go to a therapist for anything else. Like if I felt sad or if I felt depressed, like maybe I need someone to talk to. Like maybe you go to therapy for that. I think it's kind of the same line of thought of just attending therapy or having like a close knit family environment. I think a family environment is more um, preferential, I would say, than therapy, because with therapy, there are some drawbacks. Like you might end up paying, a therapist that someone recommends you, and they're just kind of like a yes man or a yes woman, and they're just going, yep, 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 yeah, I agree, and they're just agreeing with you. So you have like this false guise of positive reinforcement. So then you then end up going back to them because they're principles and morals are more aligned with making money from you than actually producing any sort of change in your life. So in that sense, you might be better off with like a family unit. But at the same time, like I said, I think that these people who are considering transitioning or transgender, go explore every channel that you can before you make a major life altering decision. And it's not just limited to transgenderism. Any major life altering decision that you're thinking about, tattoos, transgenderism, anything, any major, like maybe you're going to have some type of surgery, but like there's a chance that it could go wrong. Like weigh all of your options. And if you think you know everything about the situation, you probably don't. And you need to consult more people. Consult 10 people and then consult another 10 people, get varying different opinions. It's like you go to a doctor. If you go to a doctor, here's a great story that happened to someone that I know personally. Someone I know contracted the illness that's been going around, and they went to urgent care. And when they went to urgent care, they spoke to the doctor there, the physician, and the physician told them that you either have cancer or the illness is sitting in your lungs. And do you know what that person did that I know? They said, "You're a fucking moron. You should not have any medical credentials. I'm not even a doctor, and I can tell you that." And then that person went to an actual doctor outside of urgent care. And it turns out that the illness that's been going around was sitting in their lungs. And now they've been taking antibiotics. They've been, using the sauna. They've been undergoing all these various different channels to try and flush the illness out of their lungs. And now they're 1,000 times better. So sometimes you need different opinions. And that's it. That's really what it comes down to. Varying opinions. And now you talk about Disney. Let's get back to Disney for a second here. We've been talking about transgenderism a little bit.
Whoa, hold up.
Oh, okay,
You know,
go ahead.
I,
Got to
when
respond.
you look at these, basically they want children to have these rights and basically be able to transition. But I don't think. Do you think children understand basically the side effects of transitioning? Do they know about venous thromboembolism? Do they know about basically the risk of cardiovascular disease from transitioning? Do they know about the risk of a stroke? Do they know about these hormone dependent cancers that you can actually develop from transitioning? Do they know about basically the osteoporotic porotic changes that happen to your spine and the bone density, etc.? You think a children or a child can understand all these implications when they're basically 5 years old, or do you think basically there might be a child that plays with a Barbie doll, so that means he's actually a girl, or do you think you should wait a couple of years and maybe he'll actually grow out of it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally with you on that. Like I said, I don't think children are capable of making that decision. I think it comes down to fully functioning adults contributing to society. Anyone without a mental or physical impairment is capable of making that decision. I don't think children in any way are capable of making that decision. I think it's something that you have to let people play out. You have to let people go through phases all the time, man. Like I can't tell you, I went through so many phases when I was younger. It was like pretty crazy. Just not even in terms of like how I was personally, but like my own interest like developed, and I obviously developed like a much more well-rounded palate, and I think now I probably, in terms of interest, I mean, I think that they would pretty much be consistent through the rest of my life now. But it took a while for me to kind of figure out what I'm particularly interested in more so than other things. And I think it's the same thing with people, especially kids. Kids, you're like I said, your brain, your prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed till the age of 25. So really, even at 18, when you're legally classified in the United States as a fully functioning adult and you're able to vote, I mean, your brain really isn't fully developed. I can tell you firsthand when I was 18, I was a fucking moron. And I think that, I mean, I think I was smarter than the average person. I'd like to think that. But just in terms of some of the beliefs I had, I'm like, whoa, like, okay, I kind of completely 180'd on some of them. So, yeah, like I said, I think that you have to give it that decision and the power to fully functioning adults that, children can't make those decisions, and which is inherently why they're children. Their brain's not fully developed. They're not capable of making decisions like that, major life altering ones, that is.
Yeah, I think I'm going to take that actually a step further. And, I'm going to say adults should be able to make that decision as well. Did you know that basically 82% of transgender individuals basically have considered killing themselves or committing suicide? And do you know what other disease basically is equivalent to transgender individual suicide rate? Do you have any guess?
Uh, I think it's like gender dysmorphia, right? Is that a big one?
Schizophrenia. And we don't walk around basically normalizing schizophrenia, do we? No, I don't think so. So I think this kind of gender dysphoria, whatever like that, it's a serious disease, and I don't think we should be normalizing this in our society. I think it's actually harmful to the person itself. I think we should be actually protecting them from their own their own mental illness. And we can't, and people are forced to be medicated each and every day when they're harmful to themselves or society. So I think we should not be normalizing something like this, and we should be actually looking out for their best interest.
So on that same, we digressed a little here, but on that same topic of Disney and like a lot of the different things they're talking about, isn't it interesting how in the United States Disney is like openly pushing for a lot of these like very progressive issues, which I have no problem with. They're a private company, but like we said, there should be some type of disclosure or regulatory process involved in doing that. And I would say the same thing if this was a very conservative outlet. And we've seen that in the past with various different platforms taking steps to regulate and to kind of stop the spread of misinformation from conservative outlets, which I'm all in favor for. I think that all outlets and any sort of well, whether it's an entertainment company, whether it's a news company, depending upon the medium, actually really all the mediums, there should be some type of like regulatory element to it. But back to Disney though, and the main topic at hand, it just seems like in the United States, Disney is pushing many different issues into children's movies, into these Pixar films, and they're very progressive issues. But then at the same time, you look at what's going on with China, like they're completely changing these movies and how they're made in China because the CCP isn't obviously progressive. And we know how they feel about transgenderism and, people who are gay or people who fall within that LGBT community. So I know that you had something that you wanted to say with China in particular, and I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, Disney's actually, Disney's a little bit insane. They're actually taking a stand on many social issues. They actually removed these little children or whatever they have from like a it's a small world as well, which is kind of nuts when you think about that. But yeah, China, they with the spread of COVID, they're taking away children from their parents, and they're basically isolating them. If their parents have COVID, they basically confiscate the child and separate them, which is a little bit authoritarian to say the least. What are your thoughts on basically China, basically confiscating children to basically stop the spread of COVID? Stop the spread of this illness, which is basically long gone.
Yeah, I think China is, I mean, flat out, like there's no other way around it. They're a very oppressive regime. We've seen blatant human rights violations in the factories that they seek to perpetuate. Obviously, these companies and these factories that exist in China that solely exist to uphold some of the really some of the horrible aspects of capitalism. I mean, and really just imperialism in general. Like China is just such I don't know any other way to put it, and I know people aren't going to be too favorable about this, but it really is just such a shithole. Like shithole policies, like shithole everything. Like I mean, they literally have holes that they shit into that are in some of these cities, which is pretty funny because, um, like they're actually shitting in holes, and I'm calling it a shithole, but it really is like it is a metaphysical shithole. Um, they clearly don't care about human rights. They clearly don't care about sovereignty, individual sovereignty. Um, they allegedly, well, not even allegedly, this is a fact. They have these poor people, these poor Muslim people who, all they want to do is practice their faith. They're good, hardworking people, honest people looking to, just survive. And they're being forced into these re-education camps. And these fucking CCP motherfuckers, they have the balls to say that the United States has the largest incarcerated population, but really it's China. I mean, what are we seeing for figures of these Muslim people being held by the CCP in these re-education camps? I mean, I imagine the figures in the millions. And the United States is no stranger to incarceration, but obviously the motives are much different there. With the United States in particular, we're seeing that the incarceration rate is what it is because of really private interest and this whole prison industrial complex that kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of legislative figures and political figures being paid off by companies like formerly like the GEO Group and like Core Civics and some of these other private prison companies. Um, but interestingly enough, China, like the dichotomy is that they're doing it because they don't believe in religious freedom and religious rights. The CCP openly creates a civilization and a society that, really where religious rights are completely banned. The open worship of any sort of omnipotent figure is disallowed, and it's punishable by either death or imprisonment in one of these re-education camps, which for all intents and purposes, I mean, they're basically internment camps from World War II, to be frank. And it's just despicable. I mean, it really is. But China, their situation is that it's just the regime not agreeing with the fundamental human right to believe in an omnipotent power and to express your free will and free speech.
Yeah, China, they need a total overhaul. They're just insane over there. I don't think I would ever step foot in that shithole. If I had a opportunity, if someone said I had to go somewhere, and they said I had to go to Afghanistan, China, or Syria, I'd probably go to one of the other two besides China, which shows how bad China is. They're just they're too controlling. They think they run the world. They got this kind of authoritarian complex, and they should be put in their place. All trade should be shifted away from China. It should be moved to areas like India, Vietnam, etc. Other places like that.
Absolutely. And on that, and by the way, something else that a lot of people don't know with China, the CCP actually owns all the housing. They have these weird like housing leases that you do where like you lease the house that you're buying for like 100 years. And then upon your death, it goes back to the CCP. So I guess you're just like perpetually a renter there. Did you hear about this? I think that's how it works.
No, I'm not really sure how that works. I know they have like these like 100-year contracts or like that. You don't, because it's communism. You don't own any land. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I think you lease the house from the CCP. So like you have to be like kind of in bed for a lack of a better term with the CCP to even get housing. And like China has like a huge housing crisis right now. We obviously saw Evergrande implode, which was like whatever. But a lot of people thought that was going to have major negative impacts on the U.S. markets just because of the U.S. institutions that had exposure to that. But it never happened, which is really kind of odd how that kind of just got swept under the rug because the collapse was like basically the size of Bear Stearns I saw, or like something like that. Did you see that as well?
yeah, Evergrande was huge. We probably haven't even seen the full extent of those implications of Evergrande. Probably going to take like another 8, 9, 10 months to fully play out. And the recession's probably inbound in China. They're the one country that's actually this is probably because Evergrande, the one country that's actually cutting rates, while everyone else in the world is basically raising rates. So they're basically going against the grain here.
So on that same line of topic of housing, there was this recent study that was conducted by Wendell Cox. If you aren't familiar with him, he's from Demographia. And the major headline that came out of this study was that the US was named the most affordable major country for middle class home buyers, which is contrary to the public opinion and what's being said right now. So, in his study, Wendell Cox looked at the US, Australia, Canada, Hong Kong, Ireland, New Zealand, the UK, and Singapore. And in doing so, he used what's called the median multiple, which is the price to income ratio of the median home price divided by gross median household income. And for further reference, this ratio is used by the World Bank, Harvard, and the UN. Where do you think New York and London rank on this list? Because those are the two biggest real estate markets that most people think of. Where do you think they rank?
Well, I would assume, right? You got
With one being the most affordable and 100 being like the least affordable.
Okay, so I know like you got areas like Dubai, probably like very
They weren't selected
wealthy.
for the study though.
Oh,
The
so
study,
who's only
yes.
London and New York in the study?
So the study was US, Australia, Canada, Hong Kong, Ireland, New Zealand, UK, and
Okay, I
Singapore.
know Hong Kong. I know Hong Kong's expensive.
Yep.
What are the other areas?
Australia, the United States, Canada, Ireland, New Zealand, United Kingdom, and then Singapore.
New Zealand is also very expensive. Australia, I think, is expensive as well. I would assume Canada is probably the cheapest.
All right, so I'll tell you this, which is very interesting. New York ranked 73rd and London 79. So they were much closer to the end. So now the five most affordable cities of all these countries, the United States, Australia, Canada, Hong Kong, Ireland, New Zealand, United Kingdom, and Singapore, the five most affordable. Number one, Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was the most affordable city based upon the median multiple, which, as we said before, is the median home price divided by gross median household income. Number two was Oklahoma City. Number three was Rochester, New York. Number four was Edmonton, Canada. And number five was St. Louis. So we got some Rust Belt cities in there. We've got some Midwest. We've got a nice mix. And then we got Edmonton, Canada in there. What do you think about that?
Edmonton, Canada was at the lowest. That was the
No,
lowest one.
no. So you're saying lowest in terms of most affordable? It was the fourth most affordable.
Okay. Yeah.
So the most, so in order of most affordable to least affordable of like that top five, it's Pittsburgh, Oklahoma City, Rochester, New York, Edmonton, Canada, and then St. Louis. So let's put it this way: 4 out of the 5 most affordable cities of the countries chosen for this study are American cities.
Oh, I think that's undervalued. That's people should be buying in America then. Greatest country in the world has the cheapest cities. That sounds like a no-brainer to me. Stop buying up the real estate.
Yeah. So conversely, here's what's interesting. Conversely, the least affordable, you mentioned Hong Kong. You hit the nail on the head. Hong Kong was the least affordable city to live in the world based on this study. So
Well,
it
you know
goes.
what?
All right, let's hear it.
That's all the wealthy Chinese getting away from the oppressive regime of China. That's worth a lot. When you're a billionaire and you need somewhere to store your money, that's worth a lot of money to go to Hong Kong. But that's going to be was Hong Kong captured? Yeah, I think it was captured.
Hong Kong was turned over by the British. Yeah, they had
Yeah.
control
So
of it until the
how old?
late 90s, and then they turned it over.
No, not by the British. I'm talking about was confiscated by the Chinese again.
Well, what happened was the British founded Hong Kong, and then they turned over control of it. So it was no longer controlled by the British, and they turned control of it over to the CCP. Hong Kong was fighting for their independence more recently with all these protests that were going on because they were protesting a law that would basically allow for extradition to China, to mainland China. So mainland China is obviously, they have some oppressive laws, to say the least. And being extradited to mainland China would allow you to be charged and basically sentenced to prison in life for, I don't know, spitting out gum on a sidewalk or some ridiculous fucking thing like that. So obviously those protests were going on, but as far as who has control over Hong Kong now, the CCP has control over Hong Kong, if that answers your question.
Yeah, so I'm wondering how old is this? How old is this study? Because the
It
prices
was
probably came
just
down
done.
now.
This study just came out this past week.
Well,
So Hong Kong,
China manipulates the numbers, so
so China, I mean that we do know they are manipulators, right? They
I'm wondering,
manipulate.
right?
Mhm.
What is the trend before they were confiscated and after? So
Well, that'll have to
I would guess Hong Kong was probably much more expensive than it is now.
that could very well be true. I don't have those numbers in front of me, but I'll tell you the other five. Or I'm sorry, the other four that round out the five. So Hong Kong was the least affordable, followed by Sydney, Australia. You said Australia was very unaffordable. There you go. Vancouver coming in at number 3, least affordable. Number 4, this is very surprising to you Californians out there, or people who fled California for a better life. San Jose, number 4. Wow. I would think it'd be LA or like Beverly Hills or some fucking crazy expensive part. Or honestly, the Bay, San Francisco. Hello. You have people shitting in buckets living down the street from people who live in pretty modest homes that are priced at like $2 million. You know, people who work for Google and all these tech companies. Fucking crazy. And then rounding out that 5 is Melbourne. So you have 2 Australian cities. You got a Canadian city. You got a Californian city, American city, and then you got Hong Kong coming in at number 1. And it's funny you mentioned Canada before because you think Canada has a more affordable real estate market. They have a huge problem right now because the government's stepping in and they're just they're going crazy, man. You know, Justin Trudeau, he likes to control everything. I think he's a little bit of a control freak, to be honest with you. But Canada actually banned most foreign investors from buying homes in its country to slow the surging real estate market, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. You want to talk about regulation like we were talking about
Yeah,
before. I mean, you're just literally saying, fuck anyone who's not from Canada. You're not allowed to invest here. Like, if you really want to shoot your economy in the foot, particularly in that real estate sector, and stop American companies from investing in Canada, I mean, there's no quicker way to do it. I mean, if you're basically, I mean, really, Justin Trudeau's kind of walking in there, and he's walking in there like he's walking into Supercuts and saying, fuck my shit up, fam. I mean, that's pretty much what's going on here. It's ridiculous.
yeah. I think anybody who does that, who basically gets rid of foreign investment, doesn't allow American people to invest in their economy, I think they should be sanctioned. You can't control home prices by artificially eliminating people from the economy. I know Italy does that. It's all basically the socialist economies that do that. They think we have to keep it in house. We have to own our own real estate. We can't be allowing foreign people to own our real. If you do that, you should be eliminated from the global marketplace. And anything that you want to ship to America should be taxed heavily. I know DJT will not tolerate that.
So here's something I've just been kind of thinking about this past week. And I want to hear your thoughts on this just to kind of, we were talking about some serious topics here. So to talk about something a little bit more lighthearted. And this idea is by no means anything new or revolutionary. It's been done before. There are quite a few companies that do this, but I'm just floating this out there. So I was out to dinner this past week with one of my friends, and I had a really good conversation. And the conversation was about living arrangements. And truthfully, I don't think I need all the bells and whistles that come with home ownership. To me, housing is like a giant headache for most people, at least as I see it. And you typically see that a third of income for housing is just the norm, and it's commonly accepted across the board. And I think people need more. They need to lower their expenses so that they have more to save and invest. And honestly, less expenses gives you more freedom. I like the idea of living based on utility. So, we reacted to someone doing van life. I don't think that made the final cut for the episode that we did that with because there was some audio buffer there, but it was a pretty entertaining clip. I'll see if I could clean up the audio and post that at some later point. But we reacted to van life, and the guy in van life, he was just a complete bozo because he got too carried away with the whole notion of like, oh, I'm living out of a van, I'm gonna be a hippie, like whatever, and playing video games 16 hours a day. And like we were kind of laughing at that. We're like, okay, bozo, like, what are you doing? What are you doing for work? Like, what the fuck? You can't just live out of a van and whatever. So I like the whole idea of living based according to utility. So here's my idea in a nutshell, and I want your take on this. My idea is you basically come in, you set up a company, maybe you raise capital, or maybe you do this out of pocket or with some other, friends or partners. You buy up a couple acres of land in a countryside area, and you create tiny home communities, and you charge HOA fees for further development. And in a nutshell, you live like the Amish. So everyone in the community gets a role. So like obviously me, I mean Amber Turd, when you think of someone who's like very good as a community organizer and treasurer, you think of Amber Turd. So obviously that would be me. Then you get a doctor, you get some farmers, carpenters, and you kind of round it out with like a well-rounded group. So I don't really like the idea of being crammed into a city with a bunch of people. And I don't know how you feel about this, but I think everyone should have space between them and their neighbors, like an adequate amount of space. And when you have less human interaction, particularly in the countryside or in more rural parts of the US or even just the world, you kind of appreciate human interaction more. But I don't know. I might just be fucking crazy, right? Like, as far as I'm concerned, I think people need to appreciate each other more. And I think that kind of did happen a little bit with this illness, but now it's not any, now that's not going on anymore. But for like a week, everyone was kind of like appreciating each other a little more because there was less contact with people face to face. But I'm just curious what your take is on this. Like, and not even just what I proposed, but like just tiny housing in general. Like, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree that if people were separated, they basically would appreciate talking and conversing more. I know if I was separated and lived far away from people, that would be great. Then I wouldn't have to, there wouldn't be much discussion, and I would appreciate actually not having to talk to people. That would be my appreciation. But tiny houses are they're a good investment. You could get them for maybe about 20,000, 25,000 all in with construction and all costs put together, and you're not spending much on housing every month. You put 25,000 over 20 years. That's let's do the math right now. 25,000 divided by 20 years. That would be basically 1,250 a year. You divide that by 12, basically $104 a month for housing. That's basically unheard of. And there might be some interest on top of that. So let's just say $200 a month on housing. That's really unheard of. And you're in the countryside, so you have all the outdoor space that you need. So it's not like you cram into a house and you're living in like a shoebox or etc. You could open the door to the tiny home. You can enjoy the countryside. You could sit on a lawn chair outside, do all your work, and you have all this land space basically that you could live on outside the house, so you're not basically cramped in. So I think tiny houses are actually a great way to live. You're not tying up too much of your capital in real estate. And most of people's downfall is they want to tie up all their money in real estate, and they think it's the American dream, and then they're kind of like held captive, and they don't have enough money to basically do what they want to do, travel, start a business, do anything else, etc. They're basically captive to their home. They're basically like home poor, and instead of cash rich. And not owning an expensive home gives you flexibility that people that have expensive homes don't have.
Yeah, I mean, it's this whole notion of like, I love what you were alluding to earlier. It's this whole notion of like, you don't own your things own you. Like at some point, right? Like people who are hoarders, like they don't have that freedom to kind of like pack their shit up and leave. I love that. I love the idea of being able to be like, you know what, fuck this, like I'm leaving, and just packing your shit up and at a moment's notice, just saying, you know what, I'm out of here. And I think that's part of the freedom that comes with some of these tiny homes and just in general, and particularly financial freedom is alluring as well. But you're seeing that land. I mean, land typically is like a pretty good investment historically. Mark Twain once said, and it's such a great quote. I love it. It's a little cliche, but he's just like, well, land's a good investment because they're not making any more of it. So as long as terraforming and interplanetary travel isn't a thing, uh, and when I say interplanetary travel, I'm talking about like any sort of habitable planet, pertaining to interplanetary travel. As long as those two things aren't a thing, land is always going to be like a solid investment for the most part. Especially land that's very fertile and you can kind of like grow crops and build shit there and do a lot with it. Tiny living is cool. Tiny living's
Yeah,
dope.
the only real risk to owning yeah, the only real risk to owning like land is basically inflation proof. The only real risk to owning land is basically it getting seized. You have to basically choose wisely what country you own land in, and maybe you diversify across different countries to basically provide yourself some safety if it comes to basically a shift in the way the country thinks about certain things.
Yeah, and you mentioned this about being safe and kind of diversifying your investments and diversifying like where you own land in certain countries. But on that same topic of diversifying, right, so now we're seeing a lot of these energy companies sort of diversify from oil and natural gas into electric. And obviously we've seen this huge sort of reactionary price spike with gasoline. So can you speak more to like these investments, whether it's by the government or some oil and natural gas companies, about divesting into like alternative energy sources? I think we previously spoke about this a little bit, but I think it's something that is particularly interesting, especially when you look at cars, right, and like the usage of cars.
Well, yeah, we all know that basically with Tesla, et cetera, we've been investing in electric, basically moving away from oil, using electrical methods. We got windmills, we have solar, et cetera. But also, people seem to be forgetting about like hydrogen. There was actually a study, not a study, basically an analyst coverage done by a very well-known and respected Bank of America analyst, and he basically said all 25% of all oil demand is going to be replaced by hydrogen by 2050, which is very surprising to say the least. And I think there's actually a big incentive to actually switch to hydrogen with the lack of supply of oil in the marketplace. Would basically say Iran holding oil hostage, Russia holding oil hostage, you have Saudi Arabia holding oil hostage. You have all these countries basically holding oil hostage, and it's basically the only leverage that they hold over basically Germany, France, the UK, and the United States. So it's the only leverage they have. And if basically they're able to dwindle down this oil demand and replace it for hydrogen, I think a lot of these oppressive regimes actually lose a lot of their power, and they're going to have to rethink about how they do things and how they uh, negotiate with these other countries. And they've basically been coming out. I think Rolls Royce actually has a hydrogen plane that's going to be coming out. I think by 2030, they're going to be coming out with a hydrogen plane, and there's already electric planes, etc., in the marketplace. But yeah, I think we're going to be seeing a real shift away from oil in the marketplace, and I think Russia's in trouble. I think a lot of these countries are in trouble that have been depending on oil for a long time. At least when you look at the Middle East and Saudi Arabia, like they were smart with their investment funds, diversifying into electric and hydrogen, etc. So they're going to be okay when it comes to things in the long run. But we're eliminating a lot of this oil demand, and I, I think we're going to be seeing a huge shift uh, in the marketplace. And Goldman Sachs actually said too. There's another thing they said. Basically, the hydrogen marketplace is going to be a 1 trillion per year market by 2035. So I think people are underrepresenting hydrogen and basically overestimating electric. I know Elon says hydrogen is basically overrated, but I don't. I think people shouldn't count out hydrogen.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Rolls Royce potentially moving into that hydrogen space. They actually are one of the biggest, or I'm sorry, with the hydrogen plane, rather. They actually are one of the biggest manufacturers of jet engines. A lot of people don't know that, but they make very good jet engines. The British actually make really good engines in general. But as far as cars, like a Rolls Royce, like the common problem that people have with it is that like the body's just really shitty. like in terms of like craftsmanship, it's not particularly good. And then the window lift on those cars, just like fucking awful. Like people, you can't even roll your fucking window down because the thing fucking breaks all the time. And because it's a Rolls Royce, to get that service, it's like $1,000. So people are like, "What the fuck? Like I just spent fucking 400,000 on this car, and now you're gonna charge me 1,000 because the fucking window lift broke again." And it's like, the fuck, man, you know. But you spoke about hydrogen a little bit, and I think the hydrogen market's really interesting. I think as long as these companies don't pull a was it Trevor Milton with his company, as long as they don't pull that, I think they'll be all right. That guy like came out of nowhere. What the fuck happened with that? That was weird as shit.
Oh, Trevor Milton, that's the guy from Nikola, right? Yeah, he
Yeah, he
basically
basically took Tesla's name and then just cut the end off and was like, "Oh, Nikola." He would just
oh,
like
that's
copy Tesla straight up.
that's a guy who basically he basically took a video of a car that supposedly was moving, and he basically was pushing it by hand. And it basically, because he had a car that was basically not even running, so he basically just like a fraud. And I think this is a good topic to end on. And I think maybe next week we start off with a whole bunch of like different scams. Maybe talk about different scams in the marketplace, like huge scams, and we basically go into detail about different scams, like certain interesting scams.
And how to detect them. That's big time. How to detect them and how to better protect your money and be a savvier investor for sure.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good thing to look forward to. Is basically these big time scams, $1 billion plus scams that happened, and some of them that I have on top of my head that are very they're not even well known because there was other scams that were bigger during that time. So I think that gives the audience something to look forward to for next week.
Absolutely. And on that note, thanks again for sticking around. We are the Anonymous Investors, and we appreciate all of you coming out, sticking around, listening to the end. If you're here, leave a comment down below. The comment word of the day is koala. Thanks again, everyone.
No cap.
You heard.